In August 1968, Soviet tanks stormed into communist Czechoslovakia. The Soviet government assured its citizens the troops were there to provide friendly assistance. But the invasion triggered despair among Russian pro-democracy activists, who in the crackdown in Prague saw a harbinger for further repression at home.
There was a hope that Czechoslovakia will start some reforms, and these reforms will help not only Czechoslovakia, but to us in Russia if they will stick.
Pavel Litvinov, then a 28-year-old physicist, was one of 8 Russians who secretly headed to Moscow's Red Square to express support for their Czech and Slovak comrades. As the Kremlin clocks chimed noon, they unfurled a banner that read simply, "For your freedom and ours." The demonstration lasted just minutes before they were beaten and detained by police.
There was no question. I expected 7 years of labor camp, like many of my friends, for so-called anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda.
Litvinov was sentenced to 5 years hard labor in a Siberian mining camp. He later immigrated to the United States. The other demonstrators faced a similar fate or were committed to Soviet psychiatric wards. But it was a defining moment for the Russian pro-democracy and dissident movement to come.
It wasn't for nothing that people went to prison or were exiled, because it wasn't a simply one-off demonstration that everyone soon forgot about. It resonated widely.
Yet today, polls show nearly half of all Russians are unaware of the 1968 invasion. Fewer still of the Red Square protest it inspired.
People 35 and under don't really know about these events, but it mattered internationally. From that moment on, the Soviet Union started to disappear and people started to become freer.
The Soviet Union is long gone, but state pressure against opposition figures and government critics in Russia are hardly a thing of the past. In the Kremlin's proxy war in Ukraine and rollback on political freedoms, family members of the Red Square demonstrators see parallels with 1968.
If then it was a story about how Czechoslovakia had freedoms and lost it under the tanks, today it's a story about how Russians gained freedom and then lost it, or are losing it. And again, there are tanks, only not on Red Square. They're now in Ukraine and in Crimea.
And at a ceremony to mark the 1968 protest on Red Square, Litvinov called for the release of current-day political prisoners, even as police moved in on 2 demonstrators. A reminder that 50 years on, it is still limits more than freedoms that define the times. Charles Maines for VOA News, Moscow.